Kia ora and welcome to Cinema in Context, where we discuss all things film and the connections between. My name is Jeremy Downing.
I'm William Chen.
And I'm Sarah Watt.
And this month we are joined by a very special guest. He's a writer, a director, an editor, a fellow film critic, and podcaster. He also happens to be the better half, the other half, one of the halves of Miss Sarah Watt. Please welcome Doug Dillaman.
Hello, good to be here. And since the subject, I'll say we had a great podcast.
And I think today's an auspicious day, isn't it? It happens to be a 7-year anniversary of... Would you guys like to tell us?
Yeah, so basically I was a film reviewer back in the day, and I'd been getting to know this Doug Dillaman character a little better than just an acquaintance in the film world. And I actually did something that avid filmgoers will appreciate was a pretty big sacrifice. And I gave up the opportunity to see a particular film in order to go for dinner with this guy. And it turned out, ladies and gentlemen, to be a pretty good risk on my part. And 7 years later, we're married and still watching movies like The Best Times.
And she's left out some backstory, which could go on for quite a while, but probably the sort of precipitating incident in the lead-up was I had completed my feature film, Jake, and I invited several critics to the cast and crew screening to see if it was worth trying to put out to the public or if we should just throw it on YouTube and move on with our lives. And Sarah was one of those critics, and that rekindled our knowing each other after we'd met several years prior. And so after a slow burn of a few months...
Well, and also the film wasn't rubbish. So I think if Jake had been a poor film, we might not be sitting here today.
There are those that disagree with you, but anyway.
I mean, maybe then I'd be with Taika Waititi, who knows. But here we are.
So I have quite a serious burning question that, I think we all want to know the answer to. What was the film that you missed in order to go on the date?
So interestingly, it was a film called Inshallah. Which means, I believe, as God wills it, or if God wills it, doesn't it? And so, obviously, inshallah, God did will it, and he was like, well, that's fine. If you're going to miss this film, Sarah, then I'll make things work out with old Doug Dillaman. So there you go.
Well, good to have you back on the show, Doug. You were with us, I guess, at the start of last year when we talked about Glass and Signs. Was it
only that long ago?
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like 10 years ago since March, so it's hard to tell.
It all blobs into one.
Movies like Top Gun and Fast and Furious 9 were just on the horizon. Mulan was going to come out
No Time
next
to
week.
Die.
Ah, there we go.
No Time to Die, apparently.
Each month at Cinema in Context, we discuss 2 films, one current and one retrospective, with some connection. It could be the same director, the same actor, or a similar theme. This month, we are discussing Tenet, which came out this year in a very interesting way. And we're also discussing Memento, which came out back in 2000. The year 2000, the turn of the millennium. The connection being that they are both Christopher Nolan films. Memento being not his first film, but definitely his first largely accepted mainstream film. And Tenet being his, 9th film maybe? Something like that. 10th film.
The aptly named Tenet.
Yeah.
William, can you give us a bit of an overview of Tenet?
Of course, Jeremy. So Tenet is everything you would expect from a Christopher Nolan blockbuster in the 2020s. It is a time-twisty thriller featuring CIA agents, end-of-the-world plots, Machiavellian Russian oligarchs, and everything in between. So it stars John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, Elizabeth Debicki, Kenneth Branagh, and is about, I guess, ostensibly people who undergo, cool spy stuff, except there's time travel involved.
Excellent. And Sarah, what about Memento? Give us a bit of an overview.
So Memento, Nolan's film from the good old days of the 2000s when life seemed so simple, starred the up-and-coming Guy Pearce as Lenny, call me Leonard, a guy with short-term memory loss who is trying to track down his wife's killer. Now, the interesting thing about Memento is that the film is told in 2 directions at the same time. The main narrative starts at the end and then is told in sort of bite-sized scenes in backwards order. But each of those chapters is interposed with a flashback, which is helpfully in black and white, which runs forward, helping to explain the backstory to Lenny's predicament. And if that makes no sense to you, don't worry, because none of the rest of this podcast will either.
And we will be speaking in palindrome today, so if you listen backwards, you will notice that all of our words are perfectly placed.
Yes.
Oh, if only. Right, I guess the last thing to say is that we will be spoilering both films, so if you haven't seen either Tenet or Memento, there are a lot of great surprises in those movies that would be worth experiencing for the first time while watching them. So I would suggest pausing this and coming back to us at a later date. All right, should we jump in with Tenet?
Let's do it. Where do we start with this movie? Do you have a
I guess
strong opinion about it?
How did everyone see this movie? Because obviously it being a pandemic right now, I mean, we are relatively lucky in New Zealand to actually be able to go to the movies, for one. But yeah, how was everyone's experiences going to see Tenet on the big screen?
Ours was really positive to the extent that we went to the IMAX. So we were seeing it the biggest, the loudest, and the clearest, my understanding is, that anyone possibly could, anywhere in the world.
The highest ceiling, most important.
The highest ceiling, so that all that COVID just dribbled around up the top, above us.
And we were in the back seat, so it all was going forward as well.
Yeah. So I have to say, I think that our situation was optimum for, as I say, visuals and audio, which I understand to be really key.
Yeah, for me, I think Jeremy, you and I both went to see it at the VMAX, one of the new cinemas in the new shopping centre. It was really good. I guess I wanted to see it on IMAX. It was just going to be too much of a time and money commitment. The sound, I will say, and I guess we'll discuss about this later on as well. Sound not as clear as I wanted it to be, but everything else was really, really good. Very clean visuals. It was interesting watching a movie where half the cast had masks on and myself wearing a mask with my glasses fogging up. Really interesting, 4DX experience.
Yes, that's true.
Well, let's start talking about the sound, because I think this is a frustration. There are two frustrations that have been growing with me with Nolan. The first is the aspect ratio change, which I didn't have an issue with in Tenet. I didn't notice it. I don't know whether it had been mastered at VMAX to kind of block out the sides or the top of the image so that it all was consistent. But definitely in Dunkirk, that film, I loved every aspect of it, except for the changing aspect ratio in the middle of scenes. At least with Dark Knight Rises, it kind of they did action sequence and then dialogue sequence and action, and it kind of the rhythm of the film lent itself to that shift. But I did notice it with this. But I did absolutely have issues with the sound. I haven't been frustrated by it as much in Dark Knight Rises or Interstellar. But this film, like the yacht sequence, I don't know what they were talking about. And there's another sequence as well.
The walkie-talkie?
Yep. Don't know what they were talking about there.
The sequence where they first reveal the inversion machine and Kenneth Branagh, he's speaking backwards. And you're like,
I just don't think any of that
second.
stuff matters, though, because there's two separate issues, I think. There's those three scenes, but they're all basically like scenes where either, like with the inversion machine, everything gets revealed on the opposite side of it, or with the yacht stuff, it's all exposition that's later on, and the scene doesn't exist to forward exposition. It exists to set up this
confusion and
her trying to kill him, and this kind of like not having yet another scene of people talking in a room, which thank God. I don't think that movie would have been improved if it had been like in a drawing room with crystal clear sound and she had tried to poison her drink. I think it's just like, let's just not have a scene of people talking about bullshit for a little while, and
we'll have a 5-minute movie. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But I guess so. But I'm turning to the people I was with, like, what did they say? We're like, I don't know what they said. So I'm not paying attention. I'm losing interest in the film because I'm getting frustrated that I can't hear what's going on. So I hear you, but oh man.
I mean, I guess what I don't know is because I've only experienced it in IMAX, and I thought the scenes where we're intended to hear clearly, it was clear. And I've heard people say, I couldn't hear a thing. And I don't know if that's like the 2020 dialogue where there's three scenes that are like that and they extend that. But also, like, I can imagine, like, because I had that problem with Dunkirk and with Dark Knight Rises, that it just depends. Are you seeing it in a theater that's calibrated perfectly? Are you that? But I mean, as somebody who's played drums for 25 years and been to lots of punk rock shows, my hearing is not great, and I followed everything I needed to follow.
That's what I would say. I mean, my hearing is not great at all, and I tend to sort of, at the best of times, sit with my left ear closer to whoever I'm trying to lip read from or whatever. And I was fine with the IMAX. So for me, that's quite an indicator that, at very least, IMAX did its job. And I would agree with Doug to the extent that there was a whole lot that was. I mean, obviously, it's designed to be a how do we put it, like a answers first, questions later kind of narrative. But I have to say, I did write down and have a chuckle, as did everyone else in the cinema, when one of the characters said to the other, "Don't try to understand it." And I
Just
feel like,
feel it.
yeah, I just feel like the whole audience
Not
was like,
the most
okay,
unintentional laugh out loud line in the movie.
no,
And my son.
Oh my goodness, that line. But kind of to bounce off what you guys are saying, I think for me, I just found it a little frustrating as well. I don't
The
mind
audio or the film?
the audio and my son line, but mostly the audio. Something about it just, and this is probably going to sound really, really stupid, but I wanted to just pick up as much as I can, right? As much information, both visual and audio, as I could, because I knew I was going into one of these Christopher Nolan puzzle boxes, and there was going to be something at the end that draws on everything that came before. And just something about not clearly hearing each and every piece of dialogue from the very beginning, like during the Opera House raid. There's a lot of dialogue in these breathing apparatuses, and they sound like this, and I can't hear what they're saying. And something about that kind of drew me out of the movie just a little bit.
Here's my hypothesis about it, right? Because one thing I noticed, I was absolutely captivated from the beginning of the film, and that really intense, just like in The Dark Knight actually, that really intense set piece and the big sort of almost like terrorist attack that happens. And I noticed that the music's played backwards at the very beginning, and it all really sets the tone, and you've got the orchestra tuning up, which of course always sounds dissonant and horrible. So, you know, you guys will be aware that in Dunkirk in particular, Nolan used the shepherd tone, which I tried in my podcast to explain what that is.
You did a wonderful job, and those of you listening, if you want to go and listen to a great podcast that Sarah hosts and presents, and I believe, Doug, you helped edit
Yes.
it, yeah. It's wonderful. Really, really
So
wonderful.
it's called The Sound of Movies. Do you get it? The Sound of Movies. And I looked at Hans Zimmer's music, and in particular, something that was interesting in Dunkirk was the use of this shepherd tone. And I won't waste our time now talking about how it happens, but the point of it is to cause the brain to feel an unease, a tension around what the brain and the ears are taking in. And I think that Tenet is designed to be confusing and dissonant and to raise that sort of tension within us. And I feel as though, if you think about it, if you can hear everything that's going on, it relieves some of that tension, doesn't it? So if we are a little bit kind of on edge because we're not hearing or we're not getting or what was that or what's going on, because that opera scene makes no sense at the time. And that whole idea that, oh, the little red tag on the backpack is a reveal at the very end of the film that you've never remembered was even there at the beginning. You know, the whole idea, I think, is just setting this tone of unease.
I hear you, and I definitely agree in terms of the audio going backwards. Like, I absolutely. But it's happened in so many of his films now. We know that Nolan's a purist. I think he's got some idea about how sound design should go that is in conflict with just basic audience experience. And I'm like, if that, you know, he's got a certain ideas about film, and I love his commitment to real, you know, to physical film and not digital. But
What about his commitment to killing people by showing movies in cinemas in the States?
Yeah. Yeah, with COVID, you mean? Or
Yeah.
Because
I'm not going to let anyone watch this on demand. They're going to have to go to a cinema.
No drive-thrus. No drive-thrus.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, probably because you imagine how that movie would sound through a radio. I just like to step back, though, and also bring in Memento at this point, because I think there's a larger question, which is like, what is this movie trying to do? What is it trying to deliver? And if you go back to Memento is a very confusing movie the first time. But you get to the end
And the
of it.
second. And the third.
Well,
Sorry, anyway.
but it delivers an emotional payload, and it's delivered this tragedy of this person who accidentally killed his wife and cannot live with the guilt, and so creating meaning out of his life that sustains itself only by perpetual forgetting. And so even though you don't necessarily follow every twist and turn, I watched it again in the lead up to this for like the fourth or fifth time, but spread out over several years. I was like, what is it that happens in this movie again? But you still have that emotional weight at the end. And that's true of a lot of his films. I mean, Dunkirk, you don't necessarily if you start thinking about, oh, that's an hour and that's a day and that's a week, it kind of blows your brain. But at the end, when, Tom Hardy's on the beach, you have the emotional payoff. And I don't get... There's a little nice moment with Pattinson and John David Washington at the end here, but I don't get kind of a bigger thematic statement or payload of any kind. And there's stuff buried in there. I have a whole crazy theory we can get into later, and there's something explicitly basically saying, oh, because of climate change, the future is coming back to kill us. And it's like, okay, so maybe it's an environmental movie, but I feel like any sort of... There's a harmony between theme and form in Memento that just is lost here. There's just I have this crazy idea of inversion, and I'm going to try to
tack it into a narrative.
I'm going to make a story, and I'll throw in Elizabeth Debicki in this romantic subplot to try to appeal to something broader. But then it brings in just this really awkward, we have global universal stakes, and we have a woman worried she's not going to get to see her son. And it just seems like the height of selfishness. It's is that meta commentary on white privilege, or is it just sloppy?
Okay, look, I'm really sorry. This whole son business, we've mentioned it twice. We need to get into this very quickly right now. There is a theory that her son is Robert Pattinson. So if that theory can be borne out, then that is relevant, that she needs her son to live. She needs her son to be involved, and that would make it it would feel less like, oh, we just need to give it a bit of emotional heart.
You are blowing my mind, Sarah. I have not heard this.
Haven't?
No.
We were talking about that after the
Really?
film. We were like, we're pretty sure that's the son.
Really?
The relationship he talks about, you taught me, I've known you for years.
I had to read it on the internet.
But she never reacts to seeing him as an adult, or he never reacts to seeing her in any way that kind of
Robert Pattinson.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah, there's no even kind of extra held glance for a second or anything showing and also it's just so cutesy and buried. It's it's just that kind of, you created a text that's so complex that you go QAnon on it trying to understand it, and maybe you make a narrative that makes you happy.
So in the final scene, what they should have had was when her son walks away from school, close up on a school bag, and there's a little orange dot.
Can I just say,
extreme ways.
Doug, I 100% agree with everything you just said. I love Memento for its succinctness, and I just was blown away by watching it again. And it's the same with Inception, and it's the same with The Prestige. They have clear, human, actually simple motivations. The idea of Inception about being a young man and his father issues. It's just basic, fundamental, primal storytelling.
Yeah.
And the mother storyline is too sidelined. I find it's actually really problematic, her representation in the film, and it's the only emotional drive in the movie. The protagonist has no character, and he has no desire or anything beyond saving this woman, which just frustrated me. And so I don't care about the puzzle. I investigated Memento. I rewatch because I wanted to pull it apart, and it's because it has that emotional core, that tragedy that you mentioned. Or again with Inception, that ending with the pinwheel is just breaks my heart, because it solves this. It solves his daddy issues with a lie, but it ultimately solves their goal.
Or the reveal in The Prestige, which ties everything together so cleanly.
This discussion of class, but passion and privilege and access, and that's
it was the look on their faces, and what is entertainment, and what does it require from the entertainer.
They're just lovely themes, and I agree with you. There's lots of things in Tenet that could be things. I still don't know why the people in the future really are trying to blow up the past. I don't really know what the opera that wasn't an opera. Let's be honest, that wasn't an opera. It's just because they wanted to use that fancy Greek square. Or
Yeah, I have it written down in my notes right here.
Do you know about this?
Yes.
Character. I mean, Saito Repo was the art forger, right?
Yes.
And then there was Rotas shipping company, I think. Yeah. And then, of course, opera and Tenet.
Oh, it's cool, but
it's not a thing where you get more points in art for throwing more stuff in, which I feel is like the trap that the film falls into.
Yeah, and I just don't.
No, what about as a set piece delivery system? Like, what did you guys think about that?
I thought the set pieces were terrific. I thought all of them could be better. To me, they were all actually merits, if I was being my strict teacher self, honestly. Because I thought the art heist was really exciting, but it still felt to me like it could have gone further. Don't ask me how. I'm a teacher. You don't come up with how it could have been better. You just tell them it could have been better. And similarly, and same with the aeroplane. It was like really great, but almost could have been a bit better and all that. But I still enjoyed all of it. And I'm wondering contextually, when you have been deprived of something for such a long time.
Yeah, I think so.
Do you love it more? Maybe. It depends maybe on our personalities. There'll be people who didn't go to the pictures for ages and ages, who went in and watched Tenet and it failed for them because they needed more. Or it might be people like me who were just so glad to be in the IMAX and watching something that was huge and tall, the whole height of the IMAX screen and all that
opening attack on the Russian Opera House was exactly like that. It was just like, oh my God, something at scale and something, and also actually getting to see Nolan finally really master action, starting from Batman Begins, which is just such a mess of filmmaking, and this, it's like, I really think there's part of him that just wants to make 110-minute hard R, like John Wick style, or not, primal action film, because, this is cut to within a frame of being, adults only violence, and they just manage to pull back and suggest, because I think he could do that quite well, but he just can't help himself with everything else he wants his films to mean and be significant.
He's a very clever storyteller, and all the films that we've mentioned, Prestige, Inception, all of them are very, very, very clever. And Memento is, to my mind, cleverer than Tenet, partly because it works and it ties up, and partly because it delivers that emotional payload. I just wanted to check, Doug. I mean, I've seen Memento a great many times, and I don't think I ever came up with the conclusion that he had killed his wife. But the devastating part for me is when he willfully crosses out the information on the Polaroid, knowing that he is therefore tricking himself in that, those moments in the future when he comes around again and doesn't have his memory. Do you remember how right at the end he's like, well, I'm just going to kill this guy because he's the one that I want to be chasing this whole time.
Well, he kills his wife unknowingly by over injecting her with insulin.
So is he the Sammy Jenkins?
Yeah.
He is
there no
Tobinowski,
Sammy Jenkins?
Sammy Jenkins was a con artist that he investigated, and he's mixed up the two stories in his brain.
Oh, you see, I've seen Memento so many times that I did not think for a second that, ultimately, I did not think that Sammy Jenkins was a con artist.
Yeah.
And I believed what they said at the end of the film, where they say, look, people who are experiencing memory loss, dementia or whatever, they learn how to do their face with recognition to make you feel better. And I thought that's a very, very compelling, based in science kind of explanation for why Tobolowsky's character was legit, and that's the heartbreaking aspect of it, when his wife's face is going, oh my goodness, he is going to continue to inject me. He doesn't realise there's a tragedy there that's beautiful.
When I first watched Memento, and I remember this so clearly, that, Teddy, do not believe his lies.
Yeah.
I was like, all of this is... Because we learn that Natalie is conning him as the film goes on. She's the femme fatale. And it never occurred to me before until I recently rewatching that it is a noir film.
Yeah.
Like, it's film noir, and I kind of didn't picked it up. But
Well, because it's mostly in daylight.
yeah, this is true. In
Neo
modern
noir.
day. Yeah. And it was all resting on this comment, do not believe his lies. And I was like, when is that detail going to come in? So it's even more devastating that moment when you realize he's lying to himself to maintain this thing.
Can I just say, one of the exciting, I think, comparisons or similarities between Tenet and Memento is the fact that in Memento we see things. Now let me get my words right here, because it does confound my brain. We see things before they're explained later in the film. For example, the crossed out bit on the Polaroid. And it's the same in Tenet. We see in the wing mirror, for example, that it's been smashed ages before it actually gets smashed in one of those inverted scenes. And it's cool because we're like, oh, I'm looking out for when that's going to happen. And so we're wading through Memento for the moment when he crosses out the writing on the back of the Polaroid and stuff. So that's something that, 19 years later, Nolan has...
And of course, rewatching Memento, the very first scene is completely inverted, which is
Yeah.
awesome.
and it feels like such a special effect, and I want to get back to a couple things. One is this idea when you're making a movie like Memento, which... when Joe Pantoliano and Carrie-Anne Moss are your big stars and Guy Pearce, but also you're dealing with real locations, and so even though it's very well crafted, there's necessarily this life in it and this vitality of just like we're having to pick stuff up in locations we can't fully control, and it feels very lived in, and however many films later we're suddenly in this universe that's completely antiseptic that's been built. And I think one of the things that Christopher Nolan's done along the way as well is he undersells the complexity of what he does. So you're talking about like the art heist, for instance, and you look at that, and if you actually look and think about how mind-blowing it is that these people are running backwards convincingly while these other people are running forwards, and there's an explosion, or like this the Edge of Tomorrow scene at the end where you have half the soldiers running forward, half running backwards, and explosions going in opposite directions. And it looks seamless. That it's like, oh, that stuff's really difficult, but his aesthetic is such that he doesn't show it in a way. I mean, you imagine the Zack Snyder version of this. Which is, it would aesthetically, it would be like really sell all those moments. I mean, it would be crap in a different way, but and I really wonder about this kind of, and I think the sound and all these things tie into it. Is like when you can control everything, you're no better than your best idea. But when you can't control everything, you can be open to what everything around you adds into the film. And I think about that a lot with certain directors. Wes Anderson is another example where, stuff like Bottle Rocket's really rough and ready but has a charm, and then as it becomes more building a diorama, it just feels
so controlled.
Peter Jackson's films get worse and worse as he gets more and more money. Because he's so good at being concise. I mean, Tarantino has always said he will always live the scene on the day. He won't try and kind of construct, and that his films shine through because of that. What I will say is I agree with you in everything that you guys have been saying. Memento has this great conciseness about it. It's so... I don't know what the budget was. It must be a relatively low budget.
It's just around $4 million, if I remember correctly.
something like
It's just so cleverly put together. And I really love how the work has been done in the script. And the Tenet script is just so underworked. And I'm going to come back to the exposition scenes soon, but to talk to the set pieces and to talk about the art heist and to talk about the wow factor of just the technicality of what's going on, I was just like, I wish I cared more about this movie, because what is happening with the fight with one person going back, because I don't know how they did that. How did they do that?
Well, I was talking to you guys online about this, and I don't know if we can answer this right now, but what is the point of a temporal pincer movement? What is the point
of them going?
The point is that the front goes through and fails because they can't predict everything. And so the places where they've failed going forward, the people going backwards know what has happened, so they fix those things. So it's like, oh, we did that, but we failed because of this. But if we have somebody going back through time, they can mend that so that failure never happens.
So they knew they were going to fail, I guess?
They knew that there was this failure going to happen, and so, they knew that, so to take the Russian Opera House thing at the beginning, right? Yeah. They know that John David Washington's going to get shot by this guy, and that none of the stuff that he does to save the world will ever happen, so they send Pattinson back to save him at the last minute, and that even though John David Washington has no foreknowledge of what's to come, because of everything that comes, he's reliant on it. So that's the temporal pincer.
But for the final sequence, isn't the whole movement just so that it's a distraction, right, for the two of them or the three of them to actually go down into the tunnels and do the real mission, the extraction?
Oh yeah, totally. It's unnecessary complication. Yeah.
It was very cool. I was sitting there going, I don't understand what's happening. I don't know. I don't really know what they're trying to do, and I don't really care. But this is cool.
Yeah.
I don't know
There's
why.
a scene with the building blowing up
Yeah.
forwards in time and backwards in
Yeah.
time at the same time. It's like, oh my god,
Yeah.
this is so cool.
It's cool, but equally I'm like, I don't really get it, and I don't really care.
There's a scene where a guy gets swallowed by a war.
That was cool.
Oh yeah.
But I feel like there was a lot of missed opportunities in this movie to just really, really monopolize on its cool bits. You know, like any one of those moments could have been the Matrix flying backwards slow motion moment, but it's just so messy. And like Matrix, for instance, is another film I was thinking of just a really clear emotional thread. I rewatched that recently with my nephew.
Carrie-Anne Moss, of course.
Carrie-Anne Moss.
Joe Pantoliano.
Oh, right,
Pantoliano.
yes, of course.
And it was so well put together. And that film, when it came, I was like, what's the Matrix? You just got to go see it.
Yeah.
It's like the same thing with Tenet. I would have loved to have been able to come out of them and be like, oh, you've got to go watch Tenet.
Yeah.
It won't make sense to you for a while, but it all comes together in the end. And I said to some of you guys before we started recording, I was really expecting the opera to be the end of the movie. And I was waiting for that. And I was like, this is going to bring it together. And it didn't. And we just had this other sequence that was just as confusing.
There's part of me that thinks that Tenet could be the setup for a series of films, and there is that lovely moment at the end with Pattinson and John David Washington that makes you think, oh, we get to see a heroic death, and we get to see these characters come together in the next film, and it's not cheated. And I thought that was a really nice, elegant kind of thing. But I don't know if that's really the case. Let's talk about Jonathan Nolan for a second, because we talk about the script, and he didn't contribute to this one, whereas Memento and Prestige and Interstellar, he contributed. And I think there tends to be a director or writer is the god who does everything on his films, but in fact, like, that's often not the case. And I think that lack of another voice in this script is part of what brings it down.
But most likely.
And I think Jonathan Nolan has the reverse issue, because like I'm trying to get through the slog of Westworld.
Season 2.
I'm watching season 3.
Does he write it or direct it? He's not
showrunner.
He's on him and his wife, I think.
Yeah.
I do like the Nolans with the husband and wife teams, you know.
with Emma Thomas.
Yeah,
Same.
Yeah. But the issue with Westworld is that there is all of this plot device that gets things moving with kind of this huge vapidness of character. And Nolan's film, whilst he had not much character, it's like all of the mythology is clear, but it's kind of this mess at the front. And I kind of feel like they probably complement each other quite well.
I think Doug alluded to this before, that in a way the really, really tricky, flashy aesthetic that Nolan goes for in Tenet is almost so underplayed. He's not all Zack Snyder about it. And I think about just scenes like Washington walking through that car park and the puddles happening in reverse. And I was so aware that part of my brain was going, how is this happening?
Yeah.
I don't get it. Have they shot this with him walking backwards? Or is, and just that so many moments of confusion where the brain is distracted, and that's kind of coming back to the sound thing for me, where the brain is distracted. Compared with something like Inception, which I find Inception a desperately tricky film, but I've seen it enough times to totally get it. And apart from its kind of tutoring about with time, and I don't mean conceptually, of course it does. What I mean is, you know how, for example, when the white bus is very, very slowly going off the edge of the bridge, and you're like, crikey, this is taking forever, but we've got no way of knowing whether actually that's just artistic license or it's maths. But Inception, though, doesn't trick about with you quite so much in the brain. Narratively it does, but not in terms of what you're watching and what you're hearing.
And I find with Inception, having rewatched it a while back, it gives the audience enough information to really go on, so that by the end of the movie, you're pretty sure you understand what is happening.
Yeah.
Whereas with Tenet, there's my friends, there's external reading. There's you
Yes.
have to draw
You have
from
to do
other
the work.
sources. You have to do the work on paper, probably, in order to figure out the timelines, which is really frustrating. It's really, really frustrating.
But let's compare it to Primer for a second as well,
I thought
which
that film
is
too.
even
Yeah.
more complicated. But there's something fundamental that lands at the end of Primer, even though I think the graphs for Primer would make Tenet look like, tic-tac-toe.
Was Primer Nolan's first film?
No, Primer was Shane Carruth.
So how
So
is
the
it
relevance is it's a time travel film that's very complicated.
Yeah.
And even more complicated. And arguably you have to do the math. And in fact, I had a friend who was a critic for Sight and Sound at the time who saw it and had a panic attack because at the time, part of the Sight and Sound thing was you had to write a plot summary in addition to it. And he's just like, I don't even know how to write a plot summary for this film.
I love that you brought up Primer, Doug. I thought of Primer too, and I agree with you. Like Primer was a film that I got to 3/4 of the way through, and I thought, I have no idea what's happening now. But I was not worried about it because there was this really clear relationship between these two young guys trying to change the world, and the kind of way that destroyed their relationship. And I walked out of that film being like, you know what, I could go and spend hours on the internet and I would figure this out. But I'm actually quite satisfied with emotionally what I saw. And so with the Inception, I would have done the work, or Memento did the work. And Tenet, again, just didn't have that.
See, I feel like I'd like to see Tenet again. Full stop, really. I feel like I'd like to see it again to get my head around it a bit more and to really appreciate some of the set pieces. Although Jeremy and I talked offline about the fact that was there not that truism that we see in all time travel movies where you're instructed, if you see your other self, do not engage because you cannot what is it they say? You can't
Annihilation.
Yeah.
Annihilation. You can't take up the same space. And is there not a scene in Tenet where Washington is fighting Washington?
Oh, but they don't touch. He's wearing complete combat gear.
It sounds like such a silly
Skin
detail.
on skin.
Technicality,
That
yeah.
is a technicality because
Maybe this film's a metaphor for safe sex. Actually, so I have a crazy Tenet theory that I'm just going to blow out here for a moment. So the evil end of destroying the world weapon in the film is called the algorithm, which is it's just such a bizarre name for a weapon. And at first I'm like, this is unobtainium level nonsense. But then I thought about Christopher Nolan and his commitment to cinema and how much he hates, Netflix and all this stuff. And what does Netflix make all its decisions by? Wait for it, the algorithm.
Yeah.
Now, Christopher Nolan has also been committed, Batman movies aside, to advancing original stories. And one of the things that is consistently brought up as a plague of cinema in 2020 is how studios are only willing to take gambles on established properties. So what if the whole point of Tenet, which is only accessible if you think about it in a really dumb and non-obvious way, is that the history of cinema is converging and crushing us by only repeating the past over and over. And so the only way to move forward is to go back from the future and destroy the past. And you think about all these websites that only feed you. I go on to, we both watch things off Netflix. And when my version is up, I get recommended different films than Sarah gets recommended. And so each of our individual ecosystems for what comes to us are defined by the algorithm. And so the only way we're going to grow and prosper and have a new future available to us where we can see everything is by destroying the algorithm.
Oh, I love that.
Do you know what I love about that? I want that to be true because if Nolan is trying to do that, he's made a film that is so unpenetrable that the audience is not going to watch it and care.
Yeah. Imagine a 5-paragraph op-ed that could have done that instead of a $150 million film where you fly a plane into a building.
I did really love, I think in a similar vein, there was a piece of conversation online that talked about what they wanted the ending to be, which was the algorithm being combined, this incredible thing that will destroy everything. People have been talking about it for 2 hours, and then it doesn't work because it turns out that the true villain was the hype.
I think if I were the Kenneth Branagh then of cinema, what I would do is I would create a film that has that iconic scene of the moon's face with the rocket that goes into its eye. That would be my film, and then we would know we had come full pincer, and that would be the end.
Just coming out of the face.
Just like that. It would be the end of cinema.
Can I just say that Kenneth Branagh had some terrible dialogue to deal with and some really gross scenes, but my gosh, he did a great job.
He was glorious.
I'd also like to use that as an excuse to bring up Nolan's humors, and that's something that Nolan really gets criticized as being humorless. And I'm sorry, but Memento had a lot more laugh-out-loud lines than I remembered.
Yeah.
And Tenet, as much as everybody's like, it's humorous, I'm like, he kills a guy with a gold bar to his neck and then checks his Fitbit. How can you think that anybody who's, bloody Bergman... I mean, this isn't even talking about, like, people bungee jumping into a building or Michael Caine taking the piss out of the British or all of that,
Okay,
There's a lot of humor in
two
Tenet.
things. Gold, I really thought the forwards moving gold was going to come back into it.
When I first watched it, I thought the guy who pocketed the gold on the plane was the guy who was beaten to death by the ingot, but he's not, right?
Yeah. There's also, potential promises. And the other thing is, back to the point of exposition, which just seems to happen between set pieces, and it's just ridiculous. That Michael Caine scene, you had no idea what he was talking about.
Well, he was also referred to as Sir Michael. I did love
Yes,
that.
I did too. I have to say, I really did enjoy the diversity. I enjoyed the ethnic diversity of Tenet, even if there weren't really very many women and blah, blah, Bechdel test be damned and blah, blah. You can't have that all the time, guys. But I did enjoy... I really do enjoy that in Nolan's films. He often uses people from all over, even if he's making British people be American or whatever. And personally, as somebody whose introduction to Robert Pattinson was Twilight, and I didn't give a hoot about Twilight at all. I was clearly not its target audience. I thought he's one of the ugliest men on the planet. Did you know there's an internet article that suggests that Robert Pattinson is clinically the most handsome man on the planet, something to do with the symmetry of his face. Well, internet be damned. However, my God,
Tim Edward.
some of the films that I have seen him in, like Cosmopolis, he is superb. And in this film, I think it might be the first time I've actually heard him speaking his normal British, or, even his RP. I love the joke that RP, Robert Pattinson, is speaking received pronunciation. But he's marvellous.
I agree.
And funny.
So
good.
funny.
What an audition for becoming Batman, right? In terms of the public eye. I mean, he was one of the true stars of that film. Bless John David Washington.
Yeah, Denzel's son.
He whether it was what he had to work with, I think he just had no character. I was so uninterested. And his scenes with the arms dealer, the Indian arms dealer, their scenes were just terrible.
Here comes more exposition.
Oh, so bad.
And I actually, going back watching Memento, like, you can pick up some of that. It's been there since the very beginning, you guys. The exposition, that Nolan dialogue, where it's like, oh yes, this isn't just short-term memory loss. My condition is actually da 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 da, and man, it's been there since the very
But to be fair, I feel like using the device of the Sammy Jenkins plot, in inverted commas, that was a super clever way.
Brilliant.
I mean, like, narrative timeline aside, the brilliance of having a backwards film and a frontwards
and
flashback
that beautiful
was
moment
brilliant.
when they merge.
Absolutely. Whoa. So they go all a little bit pincer, I don't know, but something like that.
The original pincer
Yes.
movement.
But to be fair, I think using the Sammy Jenkins, particularly characterised in flashbacks, with Stephen Tobolowsky and whatnot, I thought that was a beautiful way to do exposition. Particularly as I now realise after umpteen viewings of Memento that actually it was all a lie.
Well, on that note, let's do final thoughts. Whip around the table of either film. William, let's start with you.
For both films?
Yeah.
Okay. Memento holds up, although the pacing is a little slower than I remembered. I guess it's just much more... I remember it being very fast-paced, and then this happens and that happens. And of course, there's that awesome cut where you go back to the original timeline, or the colour timeline, and then he's in a chase, and you don't know why, and he doesn't know why, and it's really funny.
Yes.
I love it.
I'm chasing him.
Yeah.
He's
Oh,
chasing
no, wait.
me.
He's chasing me, yeah.
So Memento, enjoyed it, found it a little different, the experience watching it. It's just the way things go, I guess. Tenet, I agree with you, with a lot of you guys. Like, I wanted to love it, and I think the set pieces are incredible, and I do want to watch it again. But I kept thinking of other movies that did things better. Like, you guys have seen Timecrimes?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Triangle?
Yeah.
all these movies where you have, repeat timelines kind of overlapping on each other. And maybe this is just expectation, but I thought Tenet was going to go there, and it kind of does, but it edits things out in a way that you never have everyone in the same place at the same time, especially for this final set piece, which I found really disappointing. I love movies with fourth acts, but I didn't like this one, and I thought the fourth act was really, really weak, and the movie probably would have peaked at the reverse art heist with the plane, because that was super cool.
Agreed. Doug?
Memento is tied with The Prestige as my favorite Christopher Nolan movie, and I am just revisiting it really brought it up in my list of favorite movies overall, and I think it's excellent. I think anyone who wants to make movies should watch it. Is what you can do with a lot of imagination and thought and not a lot of budget, because even for $4 million you could do most of that cheaper just by not having as name of actors. My first comment when I saw Tenet was like, I'm violently mixed on that, and I remain that. Like the things that I love, and I was really loving it for the first half hour, but then it just, as soon as Elizabeth Debicki's character showed up and all the kind of things around that, it really just got bogged down. And Sarah said before about how clever he is, and I just kept thinking of that line from Fight Club. How's clever working out for you? And I would just love to see Nolan take a moment to make something a little less clever, a little more direct, and just a 100-minute movie, linear time, no cross-cutting, all female leads, and it's an action, and they're doing a bank heist. That's it. That's the movie, and I think it could be awesome. I think it could just be and it's not the movie he wants to make, and that's fine, and we'll get something in 3 years that's incomprehensible and you can't hear the dialogue and everybody has great theories about. And maybe I'll love that one, because sometimes you get an Inception, and sometimes you get an Interstellar, and sometimes you get a Tenet.
Oh, brilliant. What a great spectrum of films. Sarah?
Memento is timeless, and I will always really love it and rate it.
Terrifically intended.
Didn't mean to, but yes. But I will always love Memento, and to me it definitely doesn't date. And I think there's a real power in a film that we watched The Lost Boys again last night. What was that, 1987? And The Lost Boys totally holds up. But there are so many films, including things like Timecop, for example, that we watched over lockdown, that don't hold up. I mean, you can enjoy them, but go, you couldn't do that now. My point being, Memento's terrific 20 years on. I really did enjoy Tenet. I would have loved things to be different about it. But I don't mind at all that it was sufficiently confusing that I'm going to want to see it again. I think I would prefer... I'm not being hoity-toity here. Normally I don't prefer to have my thoughts provoked. And I normally do prefer things to tie up quite nicely. Doug's the one who really has a capacity for confusion. But in this instance, I like it. I feel as though the world has gone to whatever adjective you want to use. Adjective? Noun? Lately, and Tenet really nicely captures the moment, and it captures the confusion, it captures the nihilism, it captures the pointlessness, it captures the grandiosity, it captures just the craziness of everything, and I quite like it for that. And so it feels inadvertently very much a film of its 2020 time, and so I like that.
Excellent. And of course, we've already mentioned it, everyone's wearing masks, so
yep.
Very
pertinent.
Did
you have final thoughts?
I'm going to do my final thoughts, I am. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I love Memento, like we've all said. It was one of my favourite films of a very long time. I think that it did things to cinema that were revolutionary, and of course, now we've sort of got the privilege of having many films that have changed the form in that way. So I wouldn't say it's dated, but it doesn't have the same kind of shine that it once had, but I really love it for its economy, I guess, how well it does with such small budget. And Guy Pearce, it's probably his greatest role. He's done lots of great work, but it really is a peak for me with his work. Tenet, I didn't understand the bullet in the wall. I don't get it. I don't understand how it goes back into a gun that it didn't come out of.
It's inverted.
Just it doesn't make sense. And
Makes street sense.
You got to think of dropping the bullet before you can catch it.
no sense, absolutely no sense. I did love the classic 60s thrillerness of it. Like I really enjoyed that. Particularly the first hour where it had that really retro feel, the way it was filmed. I loved all of that. I just want to see him make a James Bond film. That's clearly what he wants to make. I want to see it. I hope there's humour in it, like you allude, because that would be my one concern with Nolan doing a Bond movie, that he would lose the humour element of it. But I would love to see that. And, you know, when Nolan is reined in, he's one of my favourites. And I'm just concerned that he's going the way of Jackson, that he's going the way of... who else?
Tarantino, I guess.
Tarantino as well. Just losing people that can keep their ideas in check and making these, all of them. Francis Ford Coppola, even Fellini. Anyways, that's my final thoughts. Thank you for listening to another episode of Cinema in Context. If you enjoyed our podcast, then please share it with your film-loving friends. You can listen to Cinema in Context through SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, and just today we've been accepted into Amazon Music, so you can listen to any fine Alexis device near you. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, which are great places to let us know what you think of this episode or give us suggestions for future films to discuss and compare. It has definitely been a year of trying to find movies, I'm not going to lie, but we do have our next couple of months planned. Look out for our next episode in a month's time, and until then, ka kite anō!